A black samurai is a cool idea. Don't get me wrong. I would love to see that. In fact, there's other medias where you can do that. And fictional stories that you can tell where you can do that. But to do this in feudal Japan seems to present an issue. Here's this article from IGN. Let's not pretend we're mad with the new Assassin's Creed Shadows samurai isn't Asian. For those of you who don't know, this next Assassin's Creed video game is going to be coming out and it's going to be taking place in feudal Japan, where it's predominantly an ethno-state of Chinese and Asian individuals. Or Japanese, my bad. So, we're going to have feudal Japan before integration of different ethnicities coming into the country. There is a story in history of an individual who was a black man coming to Japan, and they admired him and were in awe of him. They took a look at his skin and they thought it was covered in ink, and they were interested in this person who looked completely different than them. And the guy wasn't upset with them, and they weren't upset with him. They were just confused. They had never seen somebody with darker skin than them, ever in their history. Or at least they couldn't remember someone who looked like that. They didn't have it on record. This is a person who existed in history, but he was not a trained warrior, at least not from what we can see from documentation. All that we know about this gentleman was that he was a sword bearer, meaning that he would probably carry swords for other individuals and act kind of like an ammo carrier in the army. That's like the extent of what we know about this individual. That's pretty much it. And yet they're going to rewrite history and have this character being an assassin. Now, my initial thought and problem on this is that you're in feudal Japan. Sure, there is a story in history where a person who had a darker skin tone went to Japan and was admired by the Japanese, but nothing in that story suggests that he ever became an assassin or a trained killer who could sneak in and out and avoid being caught and suspicion. And it would be a ridiculous story anyways, because he would be so obviously, evidently the person that they're looking for because of how much different he looked from them. It would be like taking a white person, dropping them in Africa, having that white person be an assassin, and then all the Africans going, "What? Who is the person who is killing all of us? Is it the possible white man who looks exactly like the other white man?" That would be the absurdity. It's the same absurdity that you get from the Golden Age Superman comic, where Clark is sent to a world full of giants, and he is a tiny human. He is a tiny human, like he's a tiny little thing, no bigger than a bird in their hands. And when he becomes a superhero and fights crime, no one can figure out who this tiny person is. It's the same absurdity, because there are physical characteristics that give away the appearance of the character. And if you're doing something in a place that is entirely based around feudal Japan, where the characters are predominantly Japanese and look predominantly Japanese, you're going to have a hard time convincing people that a person who looks completely different than a Japanese person would be able to sneak away and stay hidden in the shadows and blend in with a crowd. I would have a similar issue if you put a white person in here, because he would be so physically different in terms of physical appearance that you could obviously pick him out of a lineup. All right. And he's not even wearing a mask. His face is just showing. Let's go ahead and scroll down. This is the article from IGN. I'll cover this in as short time as I possibly can. Ubisoft has finally announced its long-awaited Assassin's Creed game set in feudal Japan, subtitled Shadows. It follows dual protagonists, a ninja named Naui, and a samurai based on the historical black samurai Yasuke. While it's a known issue that Asian representation in Western games is severely lacking, I find it hypocritical and laughable that we're only talking about the need for Asian protagonists now that it's revealed Assassin's Creed Shadows will star a black samurai. This misses the forest for the trees. While I am always advocating for more Asian men in AAA games, I will be the first to say that a better representation isn't going to be found in yet another samurai hero. Here's why your thinking is wrong, person who's writing this. I think his name is Kim. It's set in feudal Japan. It's set in a country that should be entirely focused on Japanese people. Asians. You want more Asian representation? If there's a story that takes place in feudal Japan, perhaps you should have Japanese people as the main characters. Especially in Assassin's game, where he has to blend in with the crowd and disappear into the darkness. Okay? If you're gonna have a game set in Japan, back in feudal Japan, you might as well have the characters look Japanese. Oh my gosh, what a shocker. Enough with the samurais. Ubisoft deciding to focus on Yasuke, a known historical figure, is a smart move. An Assassin's Creed game set in Japan that otherwise would have been frankly hard to distinguish from other recent open-world samurai games. And if I wanted to see an Asian samurai protagonist, I don't have to look very hard. Asian samurai protagonists are a path already well trodden. There's Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, Katana Zero, Like a Dragon, Ishni, Samurai Warriors, Rise of the Ronin, Onimusha, Way of the Samurai, Way of the Samurai 2, Ghost of Tsushima. There's also my personal favorite, Muramasa, the Demon Blade. I can go on, so it's difficult to come any other conclusion that in the limited imagination of AAA game development can only envision Asian heroes when they wield katanas or ninja stars. Here's another point. That's basically anime. Dude, anime loves to harp on Japanese history and Japanese tropes. Japan came up with the samurai who can cut through all trope. Japan came up with the blood spurting like crazy trope. Japan came up with the ideas that AAA games are using. And I know that AAA games are probably just using it so they can get whatever money they want out of it, and they can milk the customers because they really don't care about you as customers. They just want your cash. And they're going to get your cash whether it's through actually building a finished game or through microtransactions so that they can charge you out the wazoo for different skins that don't actually do a daggum thing. But in the very least, AAA games have had the due respect to give Japanese representation what Japanese people give themselves. Japanese people over in Japan, where anime comes from, create tons and tons of stories that have heavy feudal Japan influences. Samurais, ninjas, people who use amazing, magical, powerful swords. It's the classic Japanese trope. And I love it. I love watching anime. I absolutely adore it. I haven't watched nearly as much as some people, but I have watched things like Jujutsu Kaisen, Naruto, Dragon Ball Z, there's Black Clover. Some people are going to get on me for mentioning My Hero Academia, but I actually really do like that show. There was a show, The Daily Life of the Immortal King. I never got into Attack on Titan because I'm just not big on giant people. But there's a lot of anime out there, right? There's a lot of anime out there, and it's all really awesome. Not all of it, that's not true. But there's a lot of really cool anime out there. I'm thinking of watching Solo Leveling. I want to know what that's about. I've heard there's some pretty cool stuff about that. So I'm going to get into that. But Japan uses a lot of tropes that AAA games and American companies use for Japanese representation in media. So if you're going to get upset at somebody for the representation and the problems that you have with that, you have to get upset with Japan first, because they're the ones who do it the most often. I mean, it's ridiculous. You claim hypocrisy for not wanting to be a black protagonist in a game set in feudal Japan, and yet you're being hypocritical yourself as an author, writing this article stating that, I've seen too much of the thing that Japanese people like to portray themselves as the most. It's stupid. It really is. It really is stupid. You have to look at this as more than skin tone. You have to look at this in terms of a storytelling perspective. If all you do is look at black and Japanese, you're not going to get what's going on. If you look at it as, a bunch of people on the internet have a problem with a black protagonist, and you don't look at the further context of what's being said about the story, what is happening in the story, and how the story is taking place, then you aren't paying attention to the greater context. You're just paying attention to the base, superficial level of things. It's like getting upset at someone for not liking the idea of having a gay version of Jesus on screen, and people just focus on the gay part rather than the Jesus Christ part, who in the Bible has no representation of any relationships apart from the discipleship that he shares with his 12 disciples. It's that ridiculous. It's about as ridiculous as saying that George Washington was a Mexican. Or as ridiculous as saying that any number of the Japanese or Chinese or Vietnamese or Korean or any other feudal Asian or just ancient Asian king or emperor of any one of those nationalities could be represented by a Hindu or a white guy or an American Indian or a black person or a Russian or any other ethnicity other than which is historically accurate. It's the same absurdity. And people are saying, well, it's a fictional story based around a game series that is also based in fiction. Here's another reason why that's a stupid argument. In the Assassin's Creed game where they were in Greece, they had a Greek protagonist. In the Assassin's Creed game, or maybe it was the Roman protagonist. No, it was the Greeks. Yeah. In the Assassin's Creed game where it was the early America during the Revolutionary War, they had a white guy. In the Assassin's Creed games where they took place sailing the oceans, but primarily focusing on British heritage, it was a white guy. In the Assassin's Creed games, where the character came from a place that was in Italy, the person looked Italian and had an Italian-style name. The ethnicities of the characters matched that which would best, most historically and fictionally, fit with the context of the world around them. It wasn't hateful to make it so that they looked like the other characters. It was smart because it made sense in terms of an assassin who's supposed to blend in with the crowd. It's called storytelling, guys. It's not that complicated. I'm not mad because I've come to expect that people are going to do stupid stuff like this. At this point, I'm just counting down the time until they make the black hero in the story into a gay trans lesbian who has rickets. Okay? It's gonna happen. There's gonna be just a bunch of absolute dog water that comes out way before anything else good comes out. Because AAA games suck. They're full of microtransactions. They're incomplete by the time they hit the shelves. They do pre-order bonuses and they make a bunch of stories that have DEI at the center of them rather than storytelling, and it just gets boring and old, and this video's gone on for way too long, but I hope I've made my point extremely clear. It needs to stop. Make stories that make sense, not make investors happy. Make stories that are good, not compliant with the modern DEI bullcrap. Alright, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, comment down below your thoughts, make sure to follow and subscribe, and check me out on my different socials. Alright, I hope you guys have a great day and a great rest of the week.